and this is my 2018 Major League Baseball season first half recap as I recap some of the action that has gone on in the 2018 Major League Baseball season. So the first story I'm going to talk about when talking about the first half of the Major League Baseball season is the American League and kind of a three-headed race for who's legitimate contenders. Sure, you have the Mariners and the Indians, but I don't think they're as good personally as what you got right now. I mean, you got the Yankees and the Red Sox, 260-team wins in the American League East. And the fact that one of those teams has a better record than the American League Central, the Cleveland Indians, who are leading that division, and the fact that one of those teams are going to have to play a wild card game kind of makes you think, should they maybe realign things when it comes to standings? But I mean, the Yankees really being led by, obviously Aaron Judge, Giancarlo Stanton starting to pick it up after a slow first month, Yeri Sanchez, who's out right now with an injury, just a lot of their players, they're hitting, and I think the one flaw I'd have with the Yankees is their pitching staff is not as good as the Red Sox and the Astros, but Luis Severino has been one of the best in baseball this season. So I really think the Yankees, when it comes to the trade deadline, if they want to match up and beat those Red Sox, I personally think they need to go out and get another pitcher, get some starting pitching. So we'll see what happens there. But then you have the Red Sox. JD Martinez and Mookie Betts, they've been having MVP caliber seasons. Chris Sale's been one of the best pitchers in baseball, along with the rest of that pitching staff. They have Craig Kimbrell, one of the best closers in baseball. I mean, just what can you say what they're doing right now? And no surprise, the American League East has been the Yankees and the Red Sox, and it's been like that for years since the early 2000s. And then you have the defending World Series champion Houston Astros, who've kind of somehow been lost because of the Yankees and the Red Sox dominance, but they're no team to quiet or to not. They don't have anything worthy to talk about. That's not the case. Obviously, in the hitting court, led by Carlos Correa, Jose Altuve, and George Springer, Alex Bregman, they basically got most of that team that they had from last year back, and they've no surprises there. That pitching staff I think is the best in baseball. That pitching rotation of Charlie Morton, Justin Verlander, and Garrett Cole, Lance McCullers Jr., and Dallas Keuchel. So, really being led by Morton, Cole, and Verlander. So, I think the one thing the Astros probably need to look at in the trade deadline is bullpen. They just sent their former closer, Ken Giles, down to the minor leagues. So I really think that the Astros, they're going to need bullpen help. I think with the Red Sox, they're going to need, they could probably use maybe some bullpen help, maybe another bat. And the Yankees, I think, need some starting pitching as well. So we'll see what happens there with them. And then on the other side of it, you have the National League, which has just been very crowded. And, in each division, it's really a packed race between a bunch of teams. Like the National League East, the Phillies and Braves have come out, and they've been surprising people. They finally have developed their players, and they look very good. Washington, the team that kind of dominated what once was a weak division, has kind of slumped. And you never know. That could be that year could be their last. This year could be their last chance of competing, as they have a lot of free agents, including Bryce Harper, Daniel Murphy. They have Anthony Rendon. They probably have to pay. There's a lot of players on that team that they're going to have to pay, and we'll see what they do in the offseason. But and then the National League Central. You look at it, the Cubs and the Brewers, the Cardinals were kind of in there, but they've slumped, and because of that slump, just prior to the All-Star break, they fired Mike Matheny. It's really kind of interesting that the Cardinals have kind of dropped off after being one of those teams that was kind of dominant for the better part of a decade in that division from 2004 to around 2014, but that just has not been the case with them. And then you have the National League West, which has been one of the most tightest divisions in the National League, possibly in baseball. The Diamondbacks and the Dodgers, the Rockies were kind of slumping for a little bit in June, but they're starting to pick it up again. The Giants are sticking around as well, so we'll see what happens there. I mean, it's very tight in the National League compared to what's going on in the American League, where you know who are going to win the divisions and who are the true contenders. And the National And this moves on to the top player that a lot of these these teams that are in division races are looking at, Manny Machado, top player in the American League, on Baltimore, who is just they're tanking. They're one of the worst teams in baseball. So obviously the Baltimore Orioles are going to be trying to trade him. So the question is, who's going to get him? I don't know who's going to get him. There's been so many teams that have been linked to him. The Yankees have been one of those teams that have been looking at him, even though I personally don't think they need him. The Brewers, the Phillies, the Dodgers looking after losing Corey Seager earlier this year, trying to get back to World Series contention. You just have, the Diamondbacks have been looking at him. There's been so many teams looking at him, and honestly, I can't tell who's going to get him at this point. I personally think after the All-Star break in the next week or two, he's going to get traded. So we'll see what happens there. But that's just been, who's going to get him. And I think of a National League team. I think any of these teams in tight division races, if they get him, like let's say an instance, the National League West between the Dodgers and the Diamondbacks, I personally think whatever player or whatever team gets Manny Machado, I think will win the division. Same case in the National League East or in the Central or in the American League East. You just don't know where he's gonna go, and but I think he's that impactful of a player where he'll bring them to a postseason appearance, and he'll probably win a division race for you. Like I spoke about earlier, the Washington Nationals, they've really surprisingly been disappointing. After kind of a slump in April, they kind of picked things up back in May into June, but that just has not been the case, and especially with Atlanta and Philadelphia, as good as they've been, it looks like they're headed for a disappointment. And Bryce Harper is, he's had 20-something home runs, but he's hitting under 220. You don't know how much his value is going to be, and with the way the Nationals are going, especially with the big free agent market that's going to come in the offseason, this could be it for Bryce Harper in Washington, D.C., and you just don't know where it's going to go. And the Nationals, you never know. They could, they could be rebuilding within the next year, so you just don't know where that's go. I personally think the Nationals, they're going to have to make some kind of move. After the All-Star break, they need to position them, because they're currently, I think, 5.5 games back of their division. If they can get within 2 or 3 games and make some kind of move at the trade deadline, maybe they can, make a run and get back in that division race and maybe compete, not only for a division race, maybe even, if they have to, a wild card berth, but we'll just see where that goes. But they're not looking good right now, especially with how well the Atlanta Braves and the Philadelphia Phillies have developed this year, and they really made that division much more competitive. And then the final story I'm going to talk about, one of the surprise teams in baseball you would think would be, or Seattle Mariners have been surprising, but the biggest surprise, in my opinion, are the Oakland A's. And I kind of think they could potentially be, even though the Brewers, are kind of been disappointing, but they could be one of these teams that they might not compete. They might come up a little bit short this year, but they're really positioning themselves to compete in the next year or two. Jed Lowry's been great for them. Stephen Piscotty. They have a lot of great players on their team that I think could position themselves to be good in the next year or two. So there's exciting things happening in the other Bay Area team, the Oakland A's. So we'll see what happens there. But they kind of been the surprise team, and you never know. This year, they're positioning themselves where a lot of people thought they were going to be sellers. They could be surprise buyers at the trade deadline. So we'll see what happens there. But they've been one of the more interesting stories in baseball this year. So at the time this is coming out during the day of the All-Star game. The All-Star teams were announced. I'm not going to go over those, but I'm going to talk about some of the big All-Star snubs. Andrelton Simmons, I think he's had a really good year with the Angels, even though the Angels have kind of been up and down. They're just above 500, but I thought he got snubbed. Andrew Benintendi for the Red Sox, kind of been a low-key player for them. Max Muncy, he's been one of those, every year the Dodgers, they make a playoff run by one of these surprise players that comes out of nowhere. In 2013, it was Yasiel Puig. 2015, it was Jock Peterson. 2016, it was Corey Seager. And last year was Cody Bellinger. He's not a rookie, but he's one of those players that stepped up for them. Even though the Minnesota Twins have kind of been a disappointment, Andy Rosario, I thought he was a big snub for them. for the Minnesota Twins. And then David Peralta, kind of unfortunate because of Arizona and the low or kind of small market they're in, he's not talked about more. But I think he's been a great player for them, and he's been one of their big hitters along with Paul Goldschmidt. Goldschmidt, he's making his 6th All-Star appearance. I thought Peralta could have gotten a mention. He didn't even get on the final All-Star vote, which I thought was a big snub as well. But he's been a great player for them as well. And now I'm going to talk about the best players in each league, starting out with the pitcher side. I'm going to talk about the American League. Luis Severino, what can you say? What this guy's done, he's one of the leaders in the Major League in wins. In the American League, at least. Chris Sale, has been one of the best pitchers in baseball at the Red Sox, and the reason why they're leading the division. And then kind of a tie between Garrett Cole and Justin Verlander. It's really a surprise Garrett Cole leaves the Pirates, and he's pitching very well. He's having a bounce back year, and he's redeeming himself. And Justin Verlander, it seems like that getting traded to the Astros has really kind of not necessarily revived his career. I thought he was still a great pitcher, but he was definitely on a little bit of the down, slumping a little bit. But he's returned to being one of the best pitchers in baseball ever since getting traded to Houston. And then the National League best pitchers, I gotta say Jacob deGrom. It's just a shame that the Mets have just not been as good. And even with this record, I think win-loss record's it's kind of an overrated stat if you ask me. But, he's leading in ERA. He's just been one of the best pitchers in baseball. Max Scherzer, even with the Nationals slumping, he's still one of the best in baseball. And it's just kind of a shame that if the Nationals don't make a run, you're going to look at what they've wasted. They wasted Bryce Harper. They wasted Daniel Murphy. They wasted Anthony Rendon. Scherzer, just Steven Strasburg. A lot of great players for the Nationals, but he's still been one of the best. With Clayton Kershaw and a lot of injuries to those pitchers, Ross Stripling's kind of come out of nowhere, especially with Alex Wood and Rich Hill kind of slumping, but he's been a really great player for them. And then John Lester for the Cubs, he's just been really good for the Cubs, been one of the best pitchers in baseball, and why the Cubs are making another run. And I think the Cubs have looked, now that they've kind of shed, because last year they had that massive World Series hangover, but they got their stuff together to make the NLCS again. I personally think, they've looked a lot better this season going into the All-Star break than last season. So we'll see what happens there with the Cubs. But John Lester's been one of the big parts of their success. And then moving on to Best American League hitters. Mookie Betts and JD Martinez. What can you say about them? Just JD Martinez, been one of the best signings for the Red Sox. He's been, hitting the ball like crazy, and, him and Mookie Betts have been the reason why, like I've said before, the Red Sox are leading the division right now. Kind of lost in the shuffle a bit. Jose Altuve, I think he's having a really great year. Like the Astros, it kind of been overshadowed by those Red Sox and Yankees, but he's the reigning American League MVP. He's having a great season. And then Manny Machado, going to get traded soon. But he's having a really great year, and he's been one of the best players in baseball. And then best National League hitters for the Brewers. The reason why they've been they're contending for the division right now. Jesus Aguilar, one of their big hitters, going to the All-Star game. Nolan Arenado, one of the best players for the Colorado Rockies, and the Rockies have are back in the race in the National League West, only 2 games behind the Diamondbacks and Dodgers. Scooter Gennett. I'm going to talk about the Cincinnati Reds in a little bit, but there's something going on with the Reds that they could make, or not make a run this year, but there is a bit of a future for them. And then Nick Markakis, he's finally made an All-Star game. It's an interesting statistic the guy had. He had the most hits in a career before making your first All-Star game. But he's been a big reason, along with guys like Freddie Freeman and Ozzie Albers, why the Braves are one of the top teams in the division this year for the National League East. But now I'm going to move on to with the trade deadline coming up at the end of the month. I'm going to list my 5 top trade candidates for teams. I'm going to start off with number 5, Brad Hand. A lot of teams are, that's one of the things everybody looks at the trade deadline is bullpen, when you have great starting pitching and you have a great lineup overall with hitters. But Brad Hand, he's an interesting piece with the Padres, who are in last place right now. I kind of think that the Astros would be a good fit for him, especially after losing or Ken Giles has been a disappointment. So I think that's a thing the Astros are going to need if they want to repeat as champions. So number 4, I'd say Zach Britton. You know, the Baltimore Orioles, I think it would be best, considering a lot of guys are going to be free agents, to sell right now. Adam Jones is another player, and another guy I've talked about a lot in this video. You know he's number 1. But Adam Jones would be another player to sell as well. Cole Hamels, the Texas Rangers. That's a lot of, there's not a lot of starting pitching as much as it was last year with guys like Yu Darvish and Justin Verlander at the trade deadline. But he's a player I think teams will look at. JT Realmuto, I think he's a great catcher, and Miami, after the fire sale they had in the offseason, I'm surprised they didn't ship him off as well. But he's probably going to be shipped off as well to another team. And obviously, number 1, Manny Machado, the top target several teams are looking at. So we'll see what happens there. And now, moving on to predictions for awards I have in the second half. Starting off with the American League. I think the MVP in that, there's a lot of players, but I'm going to go with JD Martinez. In the National League, the MVP, I think it will be Nolan Arenado. I think the Cy Young Awards in the American League will go to Chris Sale, and then the Cy Young Awards in the National League will go to Max Scherzer. And now I'm going to talk about the divisions and some predictions I'm going to have with those divisions at the end of the second half. So the American League East right now stands the Red Sox leading that division. The Yankees are 4.5 games back, but they're the top wild card team. Tampa Bay, 18 games back. They're not as bad as they are. They're kind of they are rebuilding, but they're not really tanking like they maybe should. I mean, considering they had a fire sale, not as bad as the Marlins, but they had a fire sale indeed in the offseason. They're kind of just there in the division, not competing at all, but, Toronto 23.5 games back, after they had a decent April month. It's pretty much any contention that they had, it's gone. And then Baltimore, the worst team in baseball, 39.5 games back in that division. And then in the American League Central, the Cleveland Indians winning a weak division. Minnesota kind of, I picked that team to win the division at the beginning of the first half, and they've kind of disappointed. It's a very weak division, probably the weakest in baseball. They're 7.5 games back. Detroit was kind of competing up until Miguel Cabrera went down with an injury, and they pretty much are now in the rebuild mode after having one foot trying to compete and another foot in rebuilding. The White Sox, and Kansas City in 4th and 5th respectively, as they're rebuilding, and we'll see what happens there. Maybe the White Sox. And then the American League West, probably the best division in baseball. The Houston Astros leading that division. Seattle's 5 games back. They're at the top. They're the second wild card team behind the Yankees. Oakland, like I've said before, one of the surprise teams, 8 games back. The Angels, 14 games back, 1 game behind 500. They did get Shohei Ohtani back, but just because of how competitive that division, I don't expect them to, compete this year again. And it's kind of a shame, just another year, Mike Trout's not going to make the playoffs, one of the best players in baseball. And then Texas, as you expect, in last place, 22 games back. And then moving on to the National League, starting off the National League East, the Philadelphia Phillies and the Atlanta Braves in a tight race. The Atlanta Braves a half game back, the Phillies. Washington, not quite out of it yet, but they got to pick it up. 5.5 games back. Miami and New York the Mets are tied in last place, 13.5 games back. Miami, obviously, rebuilding after blowing it up in the offseason. And then the Mets, because of injuries and just not getting it going, kind of wasting Jacob deGrom's great season. And then moving on to the National League Central, the Cubs up 2.5 games back over the Brewers. The Brewers really had a bit of a slump prior to the the All-Star break. Kind of the hitting didn't look as great, the pitching didn't look as great. Bullpen, other than Josh Hader, there's some issues there. They got swept by the Pittsburgh Pirates, who were in 4th place. They're gonna need to pick it up, and they're one of the teams linked to Manny Machado, so maybe if they get him, they'll pick it up a bit. But we'll see what happens there. The Cubs, won the division last couple of years. They know what it's going to take. St. Louis, they went from trying to compete this year to 7.5 games back, and after firing Mike Matheny, I don't know what's going to happen there. I don't really expect the St. Louis Cardinals to make the playoffs this year. Then you have Pittsburgh, who was doing well for the first month, and then, after they traded Andrew McCutchen and Garrett Cole, it's kind of showed, and And then Cincinnati, even though they're in last place, I think they have a somewhat of a decent future, but they got an interesting choice that they want to make because you have a great hitting core, and it would be great to develop some pitching. But, those guys are going to be top guys. Scooter Gennett, I think, is due for a contract soon. So do you decide, let's extend him, or should we get trade him and get some pieces for him? You have Suarez. I can't say his first name. I'll list it in the video. But he's been one of their best players. And then, obviously, Joey Votto. So, Cincinnati has a good team around them. I just would like to see them develop some pitching. But we'll see. You would think they would be sellers, but they got something going. So if they do trade off some of their pieces like Suarez and Gennett, I would like to see them get a lot for them, though. And then in the tightest division in probably baseball, the National League West, the Dodgers, who had not led all season long in the division, somehow got the division lead by the All-Star break. Only a half game up on the Diamondbacks, but it's been pretty close. But the Dodgers, you could tell, they've kind of been, they've experienced some injuries, but all teams do. But Clayton Kershaw was out for a while, and I've noticed in his starts, Kershaw, I think the injuries are starting to come up on him. The back injuries and stuff like that, I think it's starting to come up on him. He could potentially be a free agent at the end of the year, and with a lot of players and a lot up on it, the Dodgers, I'm starting to think he may not be a Dodger for life. But we'll see what happens there. The Diamondbacks, a half game back. I thought they were, I think the one thing, I like the pitching staff, and I do like the bullpen, even though they could use another piece or two. But I personally think the Diamondbacks need to go out and make another J.D. Martinez type trade. But we'll see what happens there. You have the Rockies, who got back in it, only 2 games back. You got the Giants, 4 games back. And then you have San Diego in last, 14.5 back. And then you got the wild cards. You got the American League. The Yankees, like I said before, top team, 5 games up on the Seattle Mariners, who are the second wild card team. And then the only team that's currently 5 games or lower back of them is Oakland, who is 3 games back. And then you have the National League, where the wild cards, there's a lot of teams competing. You have the Brewers, a game up. And then on the top wild card team, then you have Atlanta and the second wild card team. And then you have the Arizona Diamondbacks, a half game back. Rockies, 2 games back. The Cardinals and Giants, 4 games back. The Nationals, 5 games back. And the Pittsburgh Pirates, 5.5 back. So here are my second half predictions for who are going to win the divisions. I'm going to say in the American League, I'm going to go with Boston. I like the pitching staff just a little bit more than the Yankees, unless they make a big move. I'm going to say the Cleveland Indians, just because of how weak that division is, and just, they're the best team by default. And then I'm going to go the Astros. Obviously that pitching staff and that core, good enough to repeat as the division champions. The National League, even though it's tight, I'm going to say the Phillies. I'm going to say the Cubs in the Central, just because, they experience. And then I'll say the Dodgers from an experience-wise as well. And then I'm going to go with the wild card teams. I'm going to say the Yankees and the Mariners, and then the National League. I'm going to go with Atlanta and Arizona. The reason the Brewers, I'm not too sure. They've kind of had a slump, and I'm not sure how long that's going to last. But Atlanta, I just think, has enough pieces this year, and I think Arizona, they'll hopefully get it together. But we'll see what happens there. It's very tight. And that's it for my first half Major League Baseball season video, along with second half predictions. So, as always, follow me on Twitter at BaileyLaser96. Click like if you like the video, and subscribe if you like the content of my channel. And leave your comments below on what you thought about my predictions and what you think will happen in the second half of the 2018 Major League Baseball season. So, thanks everybody for watching, and I will see you all later.